Good morning, everyone. We are so happy to have you here today. It is our 8th annual Advocacy Day to End Sexual Violence, and we already have 103 of you online with us this morning at 9:04. So thank you for joining us. This is an unprecedented situation. We are not at the State House like we usually are, but I think we have just as much energy as we would have in that circumstance, and it's just as important as ever that our voices are heard on these really important conversations that are happening. So I want to encourage you, if you have family members that are with you that are interested in this topic, to have them join, to share the link as the day is going on with people that you think might be invested in this topic. We have a full day of call-in meetings with lawmakers, and throughout the day, we will let you know if a lawmaker has joined us for the program. And we have just a wonderful panel of speakers that are here to share their experiences and give us updates on what's going on and really listen to our enthusiasm and our expertise on these issues. So with that, I want to introduce our Executive Director, Rosa Beltre, who has been absolutely amazing in her support and guidance during this unprecedented time. She is in the office 24/7, I know, because she is keeping us up to date and making sure we know that she is here for us, she is here for survivors. And so I just want to extend a thank you to her for all of the additional energy that she has taken on during this time. And I also want to share that she has been with OAESV from the beginning. So this is one of the many advocacy days that she has been a part of, and this is the first time it's been remote. So thank you for your guidance. Thank you for your support. And with that, I will hand it over to Rosa.
Thank you very much, Camille. Thank you for the introduction. I believe that a time as today, and the time is now for us to stand in solidarity with survivors of sexual assault and the 32 rape crisis centers around the state of Ohio, as well as the 17 community-based agencies that are supporting survivors. What time is it, right? So the month of April has been designated as the Sexual Assault Awareness Month in the United States. And the goal of SAM is to raise public awareness about sexual violence and to educate communities and individuals on how to prevent sexual violence. We all had a robust plan of how we were going to go ahead and kick off SAM, but COVID happened. And today, Advocacy Day is no exception of being interfered with COVID. But good things is we're not driving 2.5 hours to Columbus and getting up at 4:30 in the morning to be able to do that. And we are in community together to be able to actually advocate and understand what the needs of survivors around the state of Ohio are. But before I tell you a little bit about those needs, I wanted to talk to you about what we are, who we are, and what is it that OAESV actually does. OAESV is your statewide coalition of sexual assault. We believe in preventing and responding to sexual violence is the best way of accomplishing this, and it's by doing it within a human rights framework, which means that every person should be able to live free of oppression and violence, and that individual survivors have the right to self-determination in their healing from sexual violence. That is why today you will hear, as we continue to ask for legislation to pass in reference to the statute of limitation, survivors have a right to determine when they are ready to come forward. And that could be within a week, that could be 40 years after. And we don't have the right to continue to silence and to take away the time that they need for their own healing purposes. OAESV is also committed to addressing the root cause of sexual violence. Eliminating sexual violence requires public awareness. It requires outreach and education in a comprehensive manner that actually eliminates the complex needs of survivors and shines a light on all forms of sexual violence. To that end, OAESV includes and accounts for diversity, for equity, and for the intersection of all forms of oppression and marginalization in its prevention and intervention efforts. That is why, as task force are coming afloat within this COVID-19, we strongly believe that our leaders need to have a diverse pool of representative around those tables, making decisions for survivors, making decisions for the state, talking, speaking, saying, advocating. It is not just about diversity of mind, it is also diversity of class and diversity of the work that we actually do. It is great that we could have a slew of attorneys and prosecutors around the table and the medical field, but advocate-based agencies need also to be there, as we recognize that survivors are suffering every time we say stay home. And why are they suffering? Because sometimes their perpetrator is that person that they're staying at home with. Because sometimes also when there is no format of coming out, they have to stay at home pretending that it is safe while their abuser is probably their colleague or their neighbor, or is there and they have no way to go. It is important for the voices of advocates to be around those tables, as I hear day in and day out when survivors actually tell me, I don't hear anything about the services that are being provided for survivors of sexual violence and DV, because it is not a catch-all process. It is not about understanding that now we have telehealth and now we have teleresponse, but what about those that do not have accessibility? What about those that do not have minutes on those phones? What about those that are not able to have a hotspot? What about those that do not have a laptop or a prepaid phone? What about those that their minutes are actually out? What about those that their experience, even though we want to remove them from location, has been in a hotel, and hotel are not always the safe areas? So we have to think, yes, outside of the box, and we are grateful for additional purposes and things that are coming afloat. But the reality is that we are 88 counties, very different, some very rural, and we still have children that are victims of violence within their homes. We have still children that their only safe haven was those 7 hours that they spent in school, but now they are forced to be at home, probably with their abuser, to be at home and not have the accessibilities that they need to make a call. So that is our focus. OAESV is and will always be survivor focused. The primary function of the coalition is to ensure that there is a continuum of timely, inclusive, and effective support services and resources for all individuals who seek access because they have been affected by sexual violence. Thus, elevating and responding to the violence and to the voices and needs of those impacted by sexual violence is paramount work of what we do. We believe that moving forward, the state of Ohio can be free of sexual violence. We advocate for those comprehensive responses, and we are positioned to strategically amplify its efforts. The coalition will continue to build alliances and connections. It will continue to accelerate advocacy and outreach capacity. It will expand capacity and shape public policy and resources as we understand what are the true needs of survivors within the state. OAESV also intends to expand the capacity of prevention and intervention services by maintaining standards, enhancing trainings and leadership development, by also identifying and bringing effective practices to scale, and implementing policy and practice reforms that further the objectives of OAESV and its members. We understand that talking about sexual violence is not what people want to do. It is not a hot topic, and it probably is not even seen as the topic of I am going to save, because we're still talking about sexual violence with a very victim blaming mentality. So for some, it is not the just cause, but the reality is that 1 in 5, 1 in 5 which means any one of us sitting at this table today can be and might be a survivor of sexual violence. 1 in 5. 3 and 6. When we look at the numbers of percentages and understanding, this is not about is it hip or is it cool to speak about sexual violence. This is about that it's occurring. It is happening every day. And even though today we might not see how big of a boom of calls and needs there might be for sexual assault survivor, when COVID-19 as the pandemic is over, or at least it's actually capped out, we will see a surge of survivors seeking services and seeking the needs that they would need. COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound impact on family, experiencing DV, interpersonal violence, and sexual assault in the state of Ohio. But we cannot continue to silence survivors of sexual violence. That is why today, even in a virtual format, we have decided to say that the time is now. The time is now for statewide solutions. The time is now for us to understand that there is still disparities in the ways that we serve, that their inequities are still rampant. The time is now for us to say that medical care is not there for all. The time is now, Ohio, to advocate for privilege, for Aaron's law, for elimination of the statute of limitation. The time is now for us to go ahead and say that no matter how much money is allocated, we still have a lot of work to do, because 88 counties, over 13 million population, it is not enough to cover those needs with only 32 rape crisis centers. So I invite you, as we go through this virtual advocacy day, to have your ears open, to have your heart in tune. We recognize that we are trying to work in the midst of a pandemic. We understand that we are all trying to grapple with the effects of COVID in one way or another. But we don't only want to stand in solidarity with survivors. We also want our advocates, our directors, our legislators to know that we are in this together, that we hear you, we see you, we understand. And we also want our children to know that they are being seen. And there's a group of advocates with capes on trying to do their best one day at a time to not only breathe, but also to try and make it a better place for them to grow up and to live. So as we continue the day today, we have a variety of speakers, and we are honored today to have all of our speakers joining us and have decided to be here with us today. I am so happy to see over 100 people connected, and I have the honor of introducing today Leader Sykes with us. Representative Emilia Sykes was born and raised in Ohio and has represented Akron and Ohio's 34 districts since being elected in 2014. In the 133rd GA, her peers elected her as the Democratic leader of the House Minority Caucus. Before serving as a representative, Leader Sykes worked as a legal aid attorney and focused her legal education in family law and public health. With these lenses in mind, Representative Sykes prioritized public health, criminal justice reform, economic equity, and increased protections for domestic violence survivors. We are thrilled today that Representative Sykes has given us her time during this state of crisis to discuss current efforts to support Ohioans and her goals for the future progress. Representative Sykes, the audience is all yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation and being able to speak with you today, even amidst a current crisis. You can still be a voice for change. And I completely hear you, Rosa, about that 2-hour drive down to Columbus. It was much better just to walk down the steps of my home. So I'm with you on that one for sure. And I certainly appreciate the invitation to share with you and just to connect, even though we are far away. Again, my name is Emilia Sykes, and I'm honored to serve as the state representative for Ohio's 34th House District, which is I call the birthplace of champions. And I'm also privileged to serve as as the minority leader this 133rd General Assembly. In the past month, the lives of millions of Ohioans, basically all of our 11 million of us, have been turned upside down as state officials moved very swiftly and decisively to ban large gatherings and shutter non-essential businesses, to do what we've called flatten the curve to limit the spread of the coronavirus, which will ultimately save lives. But for many Ohioans, that stay-at-home order does not necessarily mean safe at home. And the longer that we are self-isolating, the more dangerous it is for those who may find themselves in abusive or violent situations at home. For example, Columbus recorded 7 domestic violence related homicides in 2019, but have reported 3 in just the past few weeks. In Cincinnati, a local domestic violence hotline has seen a 30% increase in calls since the self-isolation period began. Being in this together, as we have been told over and over again, and we should be in this together, means that we also have to pass some common sense measures to ensure that every Ohioan who has to stay at home can be safe at home. And in this together, Ohio means that we are doing everything that we can to make sure that our stay-at-home order does not put other people in danger, especially because we hadn't considered what it means when certain people must remain in places and don't have the ability to go out, similar to what Rosa was sharing about the students who find a place of comfort at school who no longer have that and will no longer have that for the remainder of the school year. This General Assembly, House Democrats have led the fight at the State House to modernize Ohio's sexual violence laws, including efforts to protect those most at risk, to end the statute of limitations on rape, to eliminate the marital rape provision, to provide contraceptives to sexual assault victims, and to provide age-appropriate sexual abuse education to all of Ohio's children. Democrats are speaking out. We've called on the Speaker of the House last week and the week before that and the week before that to convene session to make sure that we are talking about these issues that are important to people. And while the public health issue that is immediately in front of us is very important, one thing Rosa didn't mention in my bio is that I also have a master's in public health. Sexual violence is a public health issue, and it's something that we should also be considering. And so as we talk about how we're going to flatten the curve, how we're going to stop the spread, that spread should also include sexual violence and intimate partner violence as well. So we must not forget that or lose sight of that. However, even though we've called on the Speaker many times and the Senate President to reconvene us to address these issues, they have basically told us no. We are in the super minority as Democrats, and no matter how hard we try, we will never be able to get a bill on the floor alone. And so this is where I'm going to need your help. We need all of you on this phone or on this video call to be advocates, and I know you already are, and so I'm going to ask you to do something else, and I know you're probably stretched thin, but there are certainly people who are depending on the advocacy and the work of you, especially now more than ever, for these particular victims who in this period of time are being impacted by sexual violence and other violence in their homes. While we are not physically at the State House, our phone lines, our emails, and our mailboxes remain open. And any proceeding we have from now on, from public testimony, will be available for you all to participate. All of this remains accessible, and I hope that you continue to engage in the process, because while we may be away from the State House, we cannot hide from the advocacy that I have come accustomed to, and some of our other colleagues have as well. So I just encourage you to remain in the fight and remain in the struggle as we do this, even though we are far away. Our colleagues in the majority especially need to hear from you because so often we are challenged with being able to share the stories and get those stories to resonate. We really need your help, and we need your stories, your passion, and your compassion mostly to highlight the need for immediate action to keep Ohio's promise of safety and security for everyone. So we have at least one more week until the end of this current stay-at-home order, and what comes after that is still to be determined. And we may have many more months of limited mobility, which could continue to threaten the lives and health and safety of many Ohioans who are at risk for intimate partner violence. So please keep it up. Keep standing up, keep speaking out, and change will come to our state. That I am confident of, because it has to. and I will continue to be hopeful, and I am thankful for all of your advocacy, all of the work that you have done and that you will do. And before I open it up to questions, I know you all are caretakers and caregivers, and so I'm going to say please take care of yourselves and take some time away, especially from the media and the social media, to make sure that your mental space and your peace is protected as you continue the advocacy work for others. So thank you again for having me, and I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Representative Sykes. I do have a couple of questions that we received ahead of time. So while our participants are gathering any questions that they may have in the question box, I wanted to pose a question to you if that works.
Absolutely.
Great. So as the pandemic shifts life fundamentally across Ohio, we know that communities of color are impacted at much higher rates. And in your experience, in your opinion, is the Ohio government keeping this fact in mind while they are developing COVID-19 strategies? And what can we do, other than what you've already mentioned, to increase the focus and push for increased support for communities of color at this time?
Thank you. I think that's Camille's voice I hear. Thank you for that question. So the first part to your answer, I would say no. Initially, no, the state had not been considerate of health disparities, which we know find themselves in almost any health condition that exists on this earth. We have consistently been pushing back and trying to share with people that there are impacts that have happened not due to the fault of any particular person or due to any particular racial. Just because of the color of your skin does not make you a target. Racism makes you a target or more vulnerable for certain disease states. And I know in your line of work, you probably see the disparities as well. And so when the national data started coming in from other communities where they were showing that Black and Hispanic ethnicity were having higher rates of COVID infections as well as hospitalizations, it became very clear that even though we didn't have the data, we were likely going to see similar changes. And so that's when many legislators like myself started to engage the conversation in a much louder fashion and saying, we need to get this data. And when we did get the data, it showed exactly what we thought it was going to show. Even in my hometown, it is far worse than anything I could have imagined and much worse than some of the state data, but also because it's been collected a little bit better, but not completely. So one of the things that we have to do, and I know you all are familiar with this, is make sure we have the right information so that we can continue to show where the trends are, where the impact of the coronavirus is being highlighted, and then focus our attention there. That's a hard conversation to have, unfortunately, and one that has gotten me a lot of hate mail and nasty comments because, you consider when we talked about this initially with the senior population, it was perfectly acceptable to say we have to protect our seniors, seem to be impacted the most. But then when you shift the conversation and say, the Black population is being impacted in a disproportionate way, the hate mail starts to come in. And unfortunately, we are living in a society where that kind of rhetoric is acceptable. But not only is it unacceptable to hear, especially as a Black woman, not to want to see it, it is mostly troubling because that means that people's lives are being impacted. People are going to experience disease and death in ways that they shouldn't have to simply because folks are uncomfortable talking about race. Well, let me tell you, it is a lot more uncomfortable to experience racism. So people are going to have to get over that in order to truly be in this together. Ohio, we have to focus our resources and attention to the communities who need it the most, and that is what we are seeing. That's what the data shows, and moving forward, we'll have to focus our intentions that way. The governor 2 days ago announced that there was going to be a strike force on minority health. In addition to April being Sexual Assault Awareness Month, it is also Minority Health Month. So hopefully we can use the platform of that Advocacy and Awareness Month to ensure that interventions are being targeted in the appropriate way and resources and messages that are culturally competent are being delivered so every community has the opportunity to survive this pandemic as every other. So thank you for that question.
And thank you so much for that very detailed and thoughtful answer. It is really important to have an awareness of the dynamics that are going on and what it looks like, not just what we should say, but what the response is when those things are being said, because that is a very strong reality, and it's important to acknowledge what the folks who are willing to stand up and face, everyone and make those statements are experiencing when they take those risks and do that. So thank you for doing that. I do want to, before I move to the next question, very briefly instruct the team on how to type in questions. So there is a tab in the rectangle that you have with the dashboard. There should be a line that says questions, and you can type, or I'm sorry, a line that says chat. And if you go to the chat button, you will be able to type a question. Only the organizers and panelists will be able to see that question, and we will look at those specifically and then verbally ask those of the participants. So I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then if you have a question in mind, let us know. So my other question is, to shift a little bit, the pandemic is obviously hugely important, and we want to stay focused on how we can serve the best in that environment, but we also want to look forward at some different things that are going to be happening and make sure that we don't lose focus on how to prioritize legislation when things do get into whatever the new normal is. And so before the virus drastically altered everything, you had introduced House Bill 533, which seeks to establish a Women's Policy and Research Commission. And we would just really love to hear more about the substance of that bill, and then, how you see this and other pre-existing legislation, pacing through the legislature with, in comparison to any COVID measures.
Thank you for that question. So the Women's Policy and Research Commission, I wish I could take full credit for that idea, but like most legislators, we are recycling ideas. So the Women's Policy and Research Commission existed about 30 years ago. It was designed to research and look into the challenges that women face in the state with reaching full equality. And one of the reasons why I thought it would be interesting and necessary for us to reintroduce this bill is because while women have made great strides in the 30 years since this initial bill or initial research commission was instituted, we still had a long way to go. Especially as being the minority leader and being invited to a lot of different conversations about the status of women and where women were and have been, it became very, very clear, and not that it was hidden before, that women had not quite received the full equality status that we had worked so hard to do. I am one of 4 legislative leaders in the state. There are twice as many named Larry than there are women. That is a problem. We don't have enough leadership in politics, in the boardrooms, in elected office to reach 50%. We are more than 50% in most communities, and we don't have that representation throughout the state. I had meetings with women business owners who talked about while they're thriving and growing, their access to capital made it more challenging to be the businesses that they could be. They were not flourishing the same way that their male counterparts are. And whenever we talked about any of the bills and the things that we were working on in the General Assembly, they were all about how can we save women from these terrible places that we seem to find ourselves in. But there were very few opportunities for us to empower women to be entrepreneurs or to be independent and leading the challenge on their own. So put together the bill. It is almost identical to the version that was introduced 30 years ago. It is an 18-person commission that has appointees who are to study the status of women, give reports and recommendations to the legislature, and then look to see if we can provide some policy solutions. One interesting thing really quickly is, as I was researching this and looking at some of the legislation or some of the meetings and reports from previous years, they were all things that we continue to struggle with today. Sexual assault, domestic violence, workplace harassment, sexual harassment, childcare issues, health insurance. these things have not been figured out yet. And it's been 30 years. And so clearly we have a lot more work to do. And while many of my colleagues might not necessarily say that this is a necessary bill, I would beg to differ. I'm sure if you look at the disparity in the victims and the survivors that you work with and advocate for, you will see a lot of them, well, you know, a lot of them have situations that if only someone would have listened or thought about them or believed them the first time, the trajectory of their lives could have been completely different. And so what we're trying to do is encourage women to be empowered, but also to let people know that there are structures and barriers in place that were sometimes put there purposely that make it hard for women to be the women that we want to be, to live our Ohio promise. And so that's what this Women's Policy and Research Commission will do. So I don't know when we'll be back to potentially vote or listen or hear testimony on this bill. There are a lot of groups who are excited about engaging in this conversation, feeling that it was very necessary, you know, that even though we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote, we still have a long way to go. So continuing to look forward to lifting up that conversation, and hopefully we can get back to work in some capacity to continue to talk about the needs of women and how we can finish our walk to equality.
Thank you so much, Leader Sykes. We are so happy that you were able to join us today, and just having your energy and your initiative has been wonderful to hear. It's really grounding to know that there's still work happening and that folks at the legislature are still talking. So we are very grateful for your time and your energy, and I just want to make sure that you know how much we appreciate your involvement with us today. And then if we end up receiving any additional follow-up questions, we will certainly reach back out to you with those. But I do want to say thank you and just share our appreciation. So with that, we are going to move on to our next speaker. And it is so strange not being able to clap. There's that like physical thing that we usually do that we're not able to do today to transition between speakers. So it's a bit, you know, interesting and feels a little clunky, but I am going to shift over now to welcome our next speaker. Representative Laura Lanese is joining us today. Rep. Lanese was a speaker at our Advocacy Day last year. She was a member of our panel. She represents the Grove City area, and she is currently serving as the Republican Caucus Whip. And you all will be familiar with a lot of her work. She got legislation passed into law that added domestic violence judges into the Franklin County court system. She was the champion of the marriage age increase, which was something we were extremely passionate about. So she passed legislation that was signed into law that increased the marriage age for most girls to 18 with some caveats for 17 and 16, or I believe 17, sorry about that. And most importantly for our work, she was very involved in the increase for the Rape Crisis Center's line item. So she made the legislative amendment to the executive branch budgets that increased the request to far over the 1.5 million it was set at, and fought vigorously for us to get that funding, which has sustained the survival of a lot of programs in the midst of the VOCA cuts and allowed us to think cautiously about expansion during this time. So thank you so much for joining us. We are so happy you're here. And I did forget to very briefly mention that Rep. Lanese sits on the COVID task force with the governor. So she has a lot of important information for us today.
Yes, thank you guys so much for having me here. And I will need to jump off here in about 7 minutes just to get ready for the next call. I'm so glad to see that you guys are still moving forward and still continuing your work. You and the domestic violence groups are not seeing a pause in the issues that you face, and we know that, and I think it's important that you guys keep advocating for it. It puts it on my radar, it puts on everybody else's radar. It's easy to forget when we're working out of our homes that there are so much greater issues facing us besides COVID-19, and that this pandemic has shown a spotlight on a lot of those vulnerabilities that we have out in our community. So thank you for the work that you're doing, that you're continuing to do, albeit remotely, but I know you're still working very hard on behalf of your constituents. I can tell you a little bit about what we're doing on the task force. Every day at 10 a.m. we have our conference call. We are hearing primarily from small businesses that have been impacted by the shutdown of their businesses. As we look to try to pivot into reopening our economy, we're trying to figure out what that means for each of these businesses. A lot of them are losing their life savings. They have invested not only their blood, sweat, and tears, but possibly their family mortgage, things that they've worked 20 years for, and in a matter of weeks, that's all evaporated. So there's a lot of scared people out there, and we're trying to give them some hope as much as we can, as we're seeing a lot of the stimulus money is not getting into the right hands, and we're hoping that that can be fixed. Today, we will also be hearing from a nonprofit, because we know that nonprofits are also impacted. Today, it is CAPA, and we're looking at ways that we can help nonprofits. Each individual sector has different needs, different requirements, different challenges, and it's important for us to hear from them and then to figure out ways that we can help them and advocate for them when we have our conversations with the governor. So that's what I'm doing on the task force. Do you have any questions?
You know, we do, and let me see if anyone has typed anything in the question box. And I do just want to give, you know, a couple of minutes for that. I know you have to go in about 4 minutes, so while we're waiting for any additional questions, you know, what has been the biggest challenge for you and for other lawmakers in adjusting to this very rapid crisis, and, you know, kind of figuring out how to maintain semblances of normalcy and urgency within legislation that's not related to COVID? That was sort of a broad question with a lot of different caveats, but I'm just wondering what it's been like in your experience to adjust to this remote legislative framework.
I think the biggest challenge is to realize that there is life outside of COVID. We are hearing 24/7 all of the challenges that COVID has been presenting. And up until about a week ago, it was primarily the health issues that we were facing. Information access is probably, and possibly even information overload, has probably been one of the biggest challenges. We've had so many different models, and we're trying to, it's like trying to steer the Titanic, not just, you know, around an iceberg, but in the dark with very little information. We're trying not to wreck our economy, but also to take into mind the considerations of there's a lot of very fearful people out there. We have certain challenges within the congregate living population that we now realize. We didn't have a full appreciation of that in the beginning. The extreme impact on prisons and nursing homes, and the challenges that those are presented, but the frustration for people that the modeling didn't turn out like they thought it would. There's a lot of people who are, you know, very frustrated, and it's tragic that they're losing their lifetime savings. There are a lot of mental health issues involved with the pandemic, of being having to shelter in place. So we're dealing with a lot of different variables. We're struggling with our hospitals. Our hospitals were gearing up for the health crisis that didn't show, which is of course a good thing. The fact that we're furloughing nurses and doctors is rather remarkable to most people. There's a concern about what's going to happen in rural communities with their hospitals that may not recover from this, which has a direct impact for sexual assault victims. Hospitals have been telling me that they're losing $1 million a day, and these are real consequences, and we don't know what this is going to look like in 6 months, and how we're going to be able to help everyone. Of course, you don't realize how many different layers there are to our society until it's exposed like this. And everybody, there are very few sectors that don't need help, and it's kind of overwhelming. And my heart goes out to the governor as he tries to balance all of these needs, because it's just unthinkable the amount of problems that we have.
Thank you for sharing that and for your work on this task force at this time. And I know that you have to go, and I want to be respectful of your time. So from all of us, thank you again for taking the time during this very hectic period to be with us today and to share your insights on these important issues. And if there comes a point where you need anything from our group to, provide information or data on how this is impacting different groups of survivors, we are happy to share that with you. Thank you again for your service.
Camille, I would love to have some of that data because I have been tasked by the Domestic Violence Coalition to try to help them make sure that they try to survive some of their funding. So numbers are very helpful, and I know they may not be available, but any numbers that you can show me so that I can highlight that this is a continuing ongoing problem. We're seeing it with the domestic violence calls, that they are definitely going up. I talked to our county sheriff, and most crime is going down. The one glaring sticking point has been domestic violence. So any data that you can share with us, I don't know if you have it, but I just want to keep this at the forefront of most people's minds, that this is an ongoing problem that we have with sexual violence, and it doesn't go away with the pandemic. It doesn't go away with shelter in place, and it in fact might be exacerbated by the mental health challenges that we're facing as well.
Wonderful. Well, we will certainly follow up with you with that in the very near future.
All right. Thank you very much. And I'm so grateful that you guys are doing this. And I hope you all stay healthy and safe.
Thank you. You as well.
Bye.
Thank you once again for your time, Representative Lanese. I have the honor of representing now Rin Farmer and introducing. Rin received a bachelor's degree in social work from Taylor University and a Master of Social Work degree from Baylor University. She is the Rape Crisis and Anti-Human Trafficking Director at Day 1 of Crime Victim Services. She is also the chair of the Northwest Ohio Rescue and Restore Coalition. She is member of the Ohio Amber Alert Advisory Committee and the vice president for our organization, the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence Board of Directors. Rin's first interaction with OAESV was in the capacity as a rape crisis director in Northwest Ohio. And one of the aspects I value most, she said, about OAESV is that they provide critical leadership in how sexual violence intersects with race, gender, class, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, ability, age, and so much more. She is committed to working alongside OAESV to help provide a comprehensive response to survivors who are impacted by sexual violence. Rin, thank you so much for agreeing to be with us today, and also for amplifying your voice.
Thank you so much, Rosa. Good morning, everyone. It's my honor to be with all of you today. I've been the director of Day 1 at Crime Victim Services in West Central Ohio for over 5 years now, and on the board of the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence for exactly 4 years tomorrow, and it's been a pleasure to serve in both of those capacities in Ohio. I want to start by thanking all of the advocates, the rape crisis directors and coordinators, the sexual assault nurse examiners, OAESV, and everyone else for their dedication to this work. I know that all of you have had to make significant adjustments to your work the last few months to ensure that survivors are still being served and that your services are still accessible. You're amazing, and it's my honor to work alongside you in Ohio. My purpose, both as a local rape crisis director and as a member of OAESV's board of directors, is that we work to create an environment in Ohio where we can work to cultivate a culture of consent and respect to prevent these crimes from occurring in the first place, where survivors feel believed, supported, and free from shame or blame, where offenders are held accountable, where legislators understand the importance of how the laws that they pass have the ability to either directly help or hurt survivors. We work with survivors every day who choose not to come forward. You all know this. They're fearful that no one will believe them. They're afraid of retaliation. They're ashamed, blame themselves, and they don't want people to know what happened. Their family member, partner, or friend is the one that harmed them, and they don't want that individual to get in trouble. They or their family members are threatened by the perpetrator. And if they do decide to come forward, some of those fears are realized. Sometimes their family members don't believe them. Sometimes the police don't believe them when they decide to go forward with a report. Many times the case doesn't get prosecuted. Sometimes their friends don't support them. And if it gets out into the public, they get shamed and re-victimized by complete strangers. These are some of the reasons why people don't come forward. And when you look at systems that say they're there to help protect survivors, but that instead are further re-victimizing them, the problem is even greater for communities of color, Indigenous communities, LGBTQ+ communities, the deaf community, individuals with disabilities, immigrant communities, and other systemically oppressed populations. My hope, my advocates' hope, and the hope of our survivors is that services would have improved over the years, and in some ways they have. But the ways in which survivors continue to be treated have reinforced the idea that society does not value survivors, their voice, or the trauma that they have endured. So yet again, it's up to us to send a message to survivors across the state that we believe them and that they have value. We have to listen to what survivors are telling us. We have to create an environment where they're able to recapture the power that is within them, that was taken from them. We have to tell our legislators that there should not be spousal exemptions from rape in Ohio, and that there should not be a statute of limitations on rape, because healing isn't linear, and we see that with our survivors every day. We have to tell our legislators why Aaron's Law is so important, that our educators receive training to recognize abuse, especially right now, as in my community, 70% of our local children's services receive reports, 70% of reports to our local children's services come from teachers and school personnel. And we know that there will be a significant amount of trauma and abuse that we have to address when children return to school in the fall. It's important that young children know that they don't deserve to be abused, and that youth can be taught what a culture of consent means so that we can prevent sexual violence from occurring. If we are going to stop sexual violence from happening in the first place, if we are going to adequately support, advocate for, and believe survivors when they have the courage to come forward, if we're going to say no more, then we must begin to have these conversations with each other. And we must stop shaming the girls, the boys, the women, the men, and the non-binary folks who step forward to say something happened to them. On behalf of rape crisis centers across Ohio and OAESV's board of directors, I want to thank all of you for participating in Advocacy Day today. Your voice matters. The Dear Sister anthology says survival is a testament to someone's strength. Healing is a testament to the community surrounding her. Survivors are brave, they're resilient, but it's up to all of us, survivors and advocates alike, to show them, to show us as survivors that we are here, we see them, and we believe them. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rin. We so appreciate you sharing what this day means to you and your program and your experiences, helping with lots of different policy initiatives and really putting survivors first in your work every day. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Thank you.
Yes, and Stephanie did share with me, Stephanie Bowman, that we can do hand waves as a form of clapping. I am not very tech savvy, so before the end of this, somebody on my team, oh yes, actual waving our hands, not a tech thing. That makes more sense. But we're so grateful. And I do want to acknowledge that we're going to shift over now to a new speaker. Senator Nikki Antonio has graciously joined us to share a lot of her thoughts on the COVID crisis and what that means for survivors and advocacy. Senator Antonio has been with one of our strongest advocates for a very long time. She serves in the Lakewood community and the surrounding area. She's served in both the House and the Senate, and she's demonstrated a very strong interest in advancing human rights and improving public health initiatives. She worked tirelessly to establish the first rape crisis centers line item, and she really continues to support survivor rights through sponsorship of Senate Bill 162, which eliminates the statute of limitations for rape, and the Ohio Fairness Act. So we're thrilled to have you with us today. Please join me in welcoming Senator Antonio.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I'll give a wave. I want to thank the interpreters and OAESV for, so the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence, for not only inviting all of us, but also going that extra mile and making all of this conference accessible as well. I think it's really important you set a good standard for doing that. I have appreciated that the governor has set that standard and modeled how appropriate and how important it is to make sure that the conversations that we have can be shared with all of our community. So I appreciate that. I'm very honored to be with you today. I, like all of us, are trying to figure out what this means in terms of how we function on a daily basis. My days are interestingly very much the same and different all at the same time, and I'm sure a lot of you are experiencing that as well. I think it's important that I share a little bit with you on I was going to talk about certainly all of the speakers so far. I so appreciate Leader Sykes talking about all of the issues that she laid out. The fact that we have to push those of us who frankly are female, those of us who are in leadership positions, but we have to keep speaking our truth to power as legislators. I started as an advocate and an activist a long time ago. And so there are days when I wake up and I think, you know, again, not a whole lot has changed in terms of how I have to push to, first of all, get in the room, find a seat at the table. And I love, Shirley Chisholm was one of my sheroes. And if you don't know who she is, please go Google her and learn about her. She said, if there's not a seat at the table, you know what the answer to that is? Carry a folding chair. And make sure that you always put yourself where you need to be. And as women, I think it's very difficult for us to do that sometimes. They speak of us a little different as opposed to the men who are incredibly assertive when they do that. But I think it's important, and as advocates of all genders and orientations, it's still important to reinforce for all of us that we have the right and we have the necessity, especially right now, to speak our truth to power. I don't think there's a time when it was more important than right now. What's interesting for me is life gives me every day some kind of a reminder when I question, am I doing enough? And if we were all in the room together, I have a feeling that all of you would be nodding your head right now and saying, every day I get up and I think, what more can I do? Am I doing enough? There gotta be something else I should be doing to be the best advocate ever, to make change, especially policy change and social change, which is so difficult. And so yesterday's reminder for me is a group of 3 high school students who called me specifically to ask me about Senate Bill 162, which is the bill to end the statute of limitations that I'm a sponsor of, as well as remove the spousal rape loophole that happens to be in our law. And they were so interesting to me. You know, these are high school seniors. And they said their biggest concern was, will other states look at Ohio, see that there's this loophole, and will they try to enact that into their laws in other states? I found it fascinating that in my brain, that loophole represents a ridiculous intentional, because I do believe it was intentional, addition to keep that in our code. But I see it as something that in this day, in 2020, in my mind, seems like a no-brainer to remove. But then I also believe that there shouldn't be a statute of limitations on sexual assault. As was mentioned earlier, there's no statute of limitations on what a victim and a survivor has to go through once they've been sexually assaulted. That doesn't just end. And so our striving for justice should not ever end as well. But I found it fascinating that these high school students, and I loved the fact that they were outraged. They were absolutely outraged that this would be in our law. They don't understand why there's a statute of limitations. And so the reason why I thought it was important to bring that story with me today to all of you who are on the front lines, fighting every day, working to get people to understand why this is so important, trying to do your best to stay strong in this time that is very, isolating, can be a real tough experience for organizing and for organizers. But fortunately for us, we have the ability, like they didn't have 100 years ago when they dealt with the Spanish flu, we have the ability to connect like this. And while it's not the same as being in person, and I'm actually dreaming about being in crowds right now, I have to say, and joyful crowds, like I wake up and I think, oh my gosh, I had no idea how much I missed that. But I want, more than anything else, to really speak to you about how important the work that you do right now is. And, every time the door closes, the window opens, and there's, with every crisis, there's opportunity. The opportunity right now is every single one of the legislators is working from home. And there's some way to access them by phone, by email. All of our staff, and I'll tell you, our staff have never been as busy as they are right now. They're each working from home. They're answering our office phone. They're responding, and we are responding together to emails, to the requests that people give us on Messenger, on Facebook, on Twitter. There are so many ways of communicating with your legislators right now that I want to encourage you to continue to do that, to keep these issues, the issue of ending the statute of limitations for sexual assault and rape, including the spousal rape loophole. Keep pushing for them to understand how important at this time is issues around domestic violence. What's interesting is I have been one of the people from the very beginning, when we first had the stay-at-home order, really pushing for the state to take a formalized stand on evictions. However, from the very beginning, we talked to the governor's office, to the leadership in the Senate, about how important it was to make sure that they understood that while we don't want people evicted, there are times, especially in situations of domestic violence, when one has to be mindful of exceptions. And those exceptions will protect people. And 9 times out of 10, it's women's lives, save women's lives. And so we wanted them to be very understanding of the issue all the way through. And what I can say is that I was encouraged when the governor stood and talked about evictions one day, and he mentioned the fact, except in the issues of domestic violence. So I want you to know how powerful it is. Sometimes we have to give leaders the language that they need to have in order to then both understand, but then amplify what we are all saying. And so it's because of you and all the work that you do that legislators understand these issues right now. And for those that are still, we have some work to do, and we have some work to do. But I urge you to continue. This is exactly the right time. There's a long story that I won't go into right now, but at the times when I wonder the most about, again, am I doing enough? What am I doing? What should I be doing? The end of a wonderful story that I look to a lot says, you are exactly where you need to be, doing the work that you need to be doing, and the people that you find yourself working with, those are the people you should be working with. And so I want you to just remember that every single bit of advocacy that you do, and I appreciate that Leader Sykes mentioned, which starts with caring for yourself. Some of us can start to feel a little bit guilty about that our contribution to fighting COVID-19 is staying at home. You know, we're used to being on the front lines, and I'm going to include myself in this. I mean, yes, my tools of fighting the war right now are my phone, my laptop, my staff connected either by FaceTime or through electronic means. But it just doesn't feel enough sometimes. But please know that there is very good reason why you taking care of yourself and being at home and working from home, if you can right now, for those of you that can, and for those of you who are going out every day, making sure that you stay safe, wear a mask, be very mindful, wash your hands, and get a good hand conditioner so that you can continue to take care of yourself. Because when all is said and done, on the other side of this, we know we are the ones, you are the ones that end up working to pick up the pieces. We are the ones that help rebuild, that put things back together, because we've been on the front lines all along for social change. It's pretty hard right now not to say, hey, I told you so. I told you that we all needed access to healthcare. I told you that that there should be equal pay. I told you that people need paid leave. And it goes on and on and on. I told you that all people that work on the front lines, especially our first responders, need to have all the equipment they need, including a store pile over on the side for times when there might be an emergency. I told you, we told you. But we can't do that right now so much. But what we can do is know, feel very secure in the fact that we are the people, you are the people that will help us pick up the pieces, that are going to make sure that everyone not only has access to the services and the resources they need, but that those legislators understand that all of the issues that we've been talking about, all the issues you've been advocating for, are especially critical right now and going forward, and how important they are. So your voice matters more than ever now and going forward. So we need you to stay healthy and take care of yourself so you can be there for helping everyone to pick up the pieces all the way through this. There's a wonderful, Sweet Honey in the Rock is a wonderful group, and I love their rendition. I've heard the song from a couple different people, but we are the people we've been waiting for. I think it's very important that we all are in this at this time, and however small or large our contribution is to dealing with this right now, I really do believe that it's an opportunity for us to make that incredible change. But I also know that the change starts with ourselves. And so I hope you keep yourselves and your families healthy and safe as much as you can, because we know that this is not a sprint. This is a marathon, but we all know that because we've been doing marathons for years. So with that, I just want to thank you again for inviting me here. I appreciate so much that so many of you are on this call. Like all of you, I know I wish we were all in a big room where we could see each other and feel the energy from each other. But I know that that we still have the ability to energize each other, support each other, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any for me.
Senator Antonio, Cleveland Rape Crisis Center says hi and thank you for all the ways you have helped their local community. Someone else said thank you for your message of hope. It is so much needed in this time.
Oh, well, thanks. I think we have to have hope, right? First of all, we are the people that carry. I think we're the carriers of hope. I was reminded by a friend of mine not too long ago who said, we are living in a time of this horrifically contagious disease, but we must remember there are other things that are also contagious. Love is contagious. Hope is contagious. Smiling at someone is usually very contagious. Unless you're made of stone, it's hard not to smile back at somebody who smiles at you. And so I appreciate that.
Senator Antonio, we are so grateful for your time and your optimism and your message. You really spoke to me when you said we have to take care of ourselves and we have to find a way to remain engaged and be the people that we've been waiting for, while also, you know, just it's okay to rest and breathe.
Yeah.
It's a very strange time. So, you know, I think one question that we have collectively is, what do you see as the most important takeaway for, you know, one-on-one conversations with lawmakers and finding humanity in each other? It's a very
Sure.
big question.
I mean, no, it's a wonderful question, though. I think, you know, I spent 8 years in the House, and now I'm in my second year in the Senate. By the way, this is the longest time I've ever served in one job. I was Mary Poppins and moved around a lot throughout my career, but I think I still believe the most important thing that an advocate, a constituent can say to a legislator is to tell their own story, to speak, yes, certainly to someone's head about, you know, the legislation in front of them, but I think when they speak from their heart and really connect with that legislator and leave them with a story that they can understand why this issue is so important. Let me tell you why this issue is so important to me, that makes the biggest difference. And I think in the long run, that is how we are finally going to be able to pass this bill. And I want to say, from a strategic point of view, right now, while everyone is sort of a captive audience in some ways, is the best time to reach out. My belief is we're going to have a lame duck session at the end of the year, the likes of which we have never seen before. And that could very possibly be the time when legislation like this, if we can get enough folks to understand the importance of this. Look, we got enough people to understand and to support the fact that the time frame needed to increase. And so the compromise was from 20 years to 25 years in 2015. I really do believe this is the time when we can just lift this statute completely. But it comes from it's when you really speak your truth from your heart.
Thank you so much. We so appreciate your time and are really grateful that you are continuing to lead this charge. if there's anything we can do for you in the future and in support of these issues, please don't hesitate to let us know. And we hope you're able to stay for the rest of the program. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you. Thank you.
I hope you can all clap in your homes or wave your hands. I am waving mine, but you can't see me because I had to preserve the camera. But so now we're going to shift to one of our pieces of legislation that is such a big priority right now. I know that you've heard various speakers today talk about the nature of child sexual abuse and the trauma that is very likely going on in homes across the world right now. Teachers, educators, school staff are going to be experiencing very difficult circumstances when those children come back to school, and we need to be prepared. So with that, I'm so excited today to welcome Representative Scott Lips and Representative Bridget Kelly, who are championing this cause. Representative Lips serves the Warren County region and the rest of the 62nd House District, and he is an extremely active supporter of the Abuse and Rape Crisis Shelter of Warren County and a vocal champion of their programs and advocacy. And in the past 2 sessions, he's co-sponsored legislative advocating for increased training for foster parents and improvements to sexual abuse prevention education. And then Representative Kelly focuses on her service in the 31st District on issues impacting children and families, including investing in local schools and supporting paid sick leave. Rep. Kelly is an ardent supporter of the Rape Crisis Center's line item, and we are thrilled that Rep. Lips and Rep. Kelly have chosen to introduce this legislation. So with that, I will shift over. Rep. Lips will be speaking first, and after that, Rep. Kelly will join him. So Rep. Lips, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on today. And
hi, Camille. This is Jen with the Alliance. It looks like we are getting the representative on and ready to speak, so we'll just take another moment or so. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
And it looks as though Rep. Kelly has joined us. So while we wait for Rep. Lips, Rep. Kelly can come on and speak.
Hi, good morning.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. I know it was a little bit clunky getting on this morning.
It's all good. You know, we all have hiccups, whether or not it's in real life or virtually. Rep. Lips and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you a little bit today. I'm sure as many of you know, the inspiration for this bill, which has been introduced 3 times in the past, this time around has taken some special consideration due to something that happened in Rep. Lips' district, which I will not steal from him to tell that terrible story. But I think what happened there really just outlines why it's so important for us to pass Aaron's Law finally in the state of Ohio. This has been introduced in a bipartisan way by folks who tend not to agree on very many issues in the past. And so when something like that happens, we think it really outlines the importance of why the legislation is important and how it can create transformative change for families in our community. So essentially what Aaron's Law would do would be to outline sex abuse prevention education for kids from kindergarten through 12th grade. So K through 6 would be sex abuse prevention, and then 7 through 12 would be domestic violence prevention. And I missed the leader speaking, but she has really been a leader in this and getting her dating violence prevention bill passed. And I heard a little bit from Senator Antonio, excuse me, who has a much nicer background than I do for our virtual town halls, about the reason why we have to keep pushing for this, pandemic or not, regardless of what else is happening in our communities, because we know that too often people are harmed, and that when we are staying at home, it can be a particularly challenging time for victims and for other folks in our community. And so really what we want to do is give people the tools to identify inappropriate behavior so that it can be addressed, because folks have to know, and kids particularly have to know, that something is a problem in order to be able to go to a trusted adult and let them know that something bad is happening. Because if kids cannot identify inappropriate, harmful behavior, then they can never go tell somebody about the traumatic things that they are experiencing. And they might think that things are normal, that are not normal, that are not okay, that are not appropriate, and certainly need intervention. And so Rep. Lips and I have worked together. We have a group of bipartisan co-sponsors, again, in the House. And while there are a number of pieces of legislation whose trajectory may have slowed a little bit due to the pandemic, again, there's not a good time or a bad time to work on this. The time is always right to work on this and to be able to protect kids and protect young folks and help them have the tools that they need in order to be able to live safe and healthy lives. And certainly you all are on the front lines of this in our communities every single day. And we so appreciate all the work that you do in order to create better communities, better relationships, and healthier futures for the people who live in our state. So again, thanks so much for having us today. And so if Rep. Lips is on, we can toss it to him, or otherwise I might go into his background just a little bit.
Let me see. Jen, do we have Rep. Lips on?
It looks like we do not have Rep. Lips on. I know that he tried to log on a little bit earlier, and it looks like not all of his tech was connecting with our tech. So we will continue to try and reach out to him to see. But in the moment, if you would like to continue and just share a little bit more, we really appreciate you being here.
Oh no, I'll be glad to pinch hit for Rep. Lips, and you can all tell him that I was funnier than him, because he always thinks he's funnier than everyone. So we wouldn't have even sponsored this bill if it were not for Rep. Lips's leadership, both in his community and in the House. Like I said, this bill has been introduced 3 times before by some unlikely bipartisan duos, but recently it was found out that a teacher in the Springboro School District had been acting inappropriately with young kids, and they're over a long period of time. And there are 88 victims, at least, of which we are aware. That's 88 kids, 88 families, countless number of lives in a community in Warren County, Ohio. And the only reason that they found out that this teacher was acting inappropriately is because one of the kids came home from school and was talking to their parents and said, "Oh, you know, I'm so disappointed I didn't get the prize today." And the parents said, "The prize? You know, what prize?" And they said, "I didn't get to sit on my teacher's lap." That's the prize for, you know, if we do good things in gym class, or if we, you know, really excel at something. But these kids didn't know that that was not okay. And so if the first child or the second child or the 10th or the 30th or the 50th would have been able to identify that behavior as not okay, it would have been able to spare countless others from going through that just with one person. And again, this is one school in one place. And this doesn't just happen in schools. This can happen anywhere. It can be, as you all well know, it can be a family friend. It could be a trusted confidant. You know, it could be somebody that young people really have a lot of faith in to behave appropriately. But again, unless they can identify this behavior, there can be no recourse for the person who is behaving inappropriately for the kids. And so you have a kid that comes home who is internalizing this and thinking they did something wrong because they didn't get the prize, when in actuality, it was a trusted adult in the community who was doing the wrong thing. And that child wasn't aware that they should tell somebody because they didn't know that it was wrong. And so we're really trying to make sure that kids have a good foundation and a solid knowledge base to recognize when things are wrong and to know that they should tell someone and that it is okay to tell someone and that they should absolutely tell the truth about this experience and to be able to recognize that bad behavior when it happens, not 3 days from then, 3 years from then, or 3 decades from them. We really want to make sure these kids are equipped with the knowledge they need to identify it and remedy it as soon as possible. So I'd be glad to take any questions. So I will say, if folks are sending questions in the chat or anything like that, this bill has been slowed the past few times because I think there are some legislators who perceived it to do things that it didn't. And so again, this is really just to provide educational curriculum on appropriate behavior so that kids can identify inappropriate behavior and we can help them to have a safer, healthier, better future, because we don't want kids to become adults who have to live their trauma over and over and over again throughout the course of their life.
Okay, this is Scott Lips. Can anyone hear me yet?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much, Rep Lips. We're so glad that you were able to join us, and we apologize about that technical difficulties.
It was crazy. I tried it at work, couldn't get volume. So I tried it out in the car on my phone, couldn't get volume. So I drove home and got my laptop. So it's been a real nightmare. I want to thank Nikki Antonio for her presentation. And I want to thank Bridget Kelly for stepping in and talking about our fine work on this. I clearly enjoy working with Nikki a lot more than I do Representative Kelly, but we'll talk about that next time. So, no, she's such great partners with Nikki and with Senator Antonio and Representative Kelly. So let me give you the update from where we stand with where Bridget left you. John Austin Connor, we suspect that he was involved with 88 first graders at Clear Creek Elementary. Our tape was on a 90-day loop once we found out what was going on. So we only have video evidence of 36 of the crimes. He was, of course, prosecuted, terminated, and then prosecuted, and was found guilty on 34 of the 36 charges. And he is now facing 5 years in prison. So from this point, from the legal side, we've been able to win. The loss is what it costs these families and these children and the parents, the school system, the confidence and faith and hope. And so it's been truly a difficult situation. And that was on evidence when we did our health committee hearings and had families come in and talk about this. So you probably know we've hit a roadblock in the House, that the bill is now sitting in the Education Committee with Don Jones as the chairman. We will get some hearings, but the far right has blocked the bill, claiming that this is not an attempt to protect children. It's an attempt to open up the school system to teach sex education. I'll tell you a quote that was said that really shook me up. And that quote was, well, this is just your chance to show a sixth grader a picture of a penis. And it was like, are you just kidding? You're missing the entire point. So we had worked on this bill for a year, and no one had gone down that path, not one discussion of it. So it's frustrating. And what I'm afraid the pandemic has done is allowed our bill to be backburnered and have us pushed back and not get the attention that we deserve. The legal trial went ahead and proceeded to its end. So that part took place, but I really see an uphill battle. And Senator Antonio talked about lame duck. I don't know if we can make a lame duck issue out of this. Obviously, we're going to try. And obviously, I've written to Chairman Jones several times asking for a hearing, but he can't even tell me when they're going to meet again. And the problem with that is, remember, Education Committee's dealing with ed choice issues. So they're going to talk about when schools come back, how they come back, how testing will be now impacted, and then ed choice. So I don't even think we'll be a top priority when we get back in. And I'm sorry to be a downer, but I'm just giving you the true perspective of where we're at today.
Rep. Lips, this is Bridget. I agree with you on all of that. And I think that might be even more reason for folks to continue to advocate, to give the bill some attention, to recognize that this is an important issue throughout the state, not just in your district, not just in my district, and something that, pandemic or not, there should be action because of the potential for harm in the future.
No, exactly. This is a critical issue. Why should another community go through what Springboro has gone through? And we're not talking one child. We're talking 88 children impacted in this community. So if that's not enough evidence to cause this to be a priority, I just don't know. I think we need to pull the fire alarm and increase the pressure, just as you said, Representative Kelly. We cannot allow this to slip away this time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Representative Lips and Representative Kelly, especially during this time as we recognize that many children might be in new settings rather than at school. They might be at home. This issue is always incredibly important. And it looks like we do have a question for you all. So I'll pass it over to our staff that are helping with questions so we can get that question to you.
So one of the questions is asking if you can share some of the pushbacks to Aaron's Law and the ways that we might be able to help address some of those specific concerns.
I
can
think
see you, Bridget.
I was going to say, I think
I can see you.
Maybe better position to answer that question, because I think by and large, the colleagues on my side of the aisle tend to be tend to think that there's a little bit more of an imperative on this, and are not necessarily so averse to the idea generally of educating kids about these kinds of things, and are more likely to sort of take the bill for what it is, which is sex abuse prevention legislation, not sex education, which has been a little bit of a challenge in the past.
Yeah, and I agree. The pushback, let me give you some examples so you have real life and can really help. Representative Kyle Kaler from Springfield, Ohio, essentially blocked this bill in the prior General Assembly. As Bridget mentioned, this isn't the first time this has been introduced. It's just the first time we've got 88 kids in Springboro impacted. Representative Kaler could never get his arms around the fact of what the bill really did. So this time we reintroduced it with this trauma in Springboro, and I was able to meet with Representative Kaler, and ironically enough, he needed something else out of me as Chairman of Health, and we were able to strike a situation where he's neutral. So he has not been blocking, he's not supporting, but he's the example of a lot of our representatives that don't look at this bill as what it really stands for. Candace Keller, Representative Keller, had previously been opposed, and she sits on health committee, and I discussed it with her, and while I think she remains opposed, she did not come out against the bill. So we've got a lot of people that are just sitting on the fence watching. I will tell you that CCV, Citizens for Some Concerned Values, Concerned Citizens, it's down in Cincinnati, I think, where Representative Kelly is. They have been the most outspoken and have had 2 different representatives in our office just beating us to death. It was frustrating and negative and a horrible meeting on how we are ruining children's lives with bills like this. And the opposition was not, they had 4 separate points of opposition, and they made us sure, they said if we somehow got it out of the House, they'd block it in the Senate. I mean, it was an extremely defeating meeting. So the opposition is not going to be quiet. I would tell you that's why we have to work even harder.
And I would think that we would say that we're ruining kids' lives by not doing this, because we are not doing everything we can in order to prevent this from happening to more kids in more places in the future.
So another question. Oh, sorry. Another question was asking how Ohioans can advocate on Erin's laws outside of advocacy days like today.
In Senator Antonio's presentation, she talked about building relationships with your legislators. And Bridget and I have talked on this several times. We think you should advocate in Columbus and come meet people in Columbus, but we also think that one of the most important parts of your relationship is to meet them in their district. I believe someone that takes time to track me down at a library or a situation where I'm appearing in the district, that helps me build that rapport with them, and it shows me they're very committed. So if you have relationships with representatives, reach out to them now and say, there's a bill that has tremendous benefit to the children in Ohio, and just get Erin's law out in front of them. Build those personal relationships. That's what we're going to do it. I mean, Bridget and I have tried it inside, but we're not going to be effective with everyone. So we're going to need your help in kind of increasing the pressure.
I couldn't agree more with that. And I would say if you live in a place where your legislator is in favor of this, contact them. And if you live in a place where your legislator is not in favor of this, contact them. And if your legislator is on the fence, talk to them about why they need to be supportive of this.
So another question, we have a couple questions coming in. What's the response of educators to the proposed bill, given the value in meeting Common Core standards for education versus sexual abuse prevention?
The educators that we've spoken with have been in favor of the bill, and if they aren't coming out as proponents, they're certainly not coming out against it. You know, we put a lot on teachers. We do, but you know, all our kids go through school, and so that is an appropriate place to learn reading, writing, arithmetic, and how you should and should not expect to be treated.
I had 2 superintendents in Warren County. There are 7 in my district. I had 2 of the 7 reach out to me about the bill for clarification. I had no pushback from superintendents and no pushback from the educators. So that's not where we need your help. We need your help with the conservative community. We need your help with the more conservative side of the R caucus.
So another question is asking some other real life points that you would recommend to use in addition to the Springborough's case to highlight the need for Erin's law.
Rep Lips, I can't see you, so I'm just gonna jump in.
And I can see you. It's hilarious. I can see the clock on the wall behind you, and it's funny to watch you wait. So you go.
Well, I mean, I think that folks, especially folks in this organization who are used to advocating for and with people who have experienced trauma in their lives, are very well suited to discuss the long-term impact of trauma on folks. Because if you experience a trauma when you're a child, it's not like that just goes away. It's not like you experience that trauma and on your next birthday it just gets erased. It stays with you forever, and it's impactful on you forever. And you need tools to deal with it forever. And for some folks, it can be crippling over the course of a lifetime. So it just doesn't impact you when you're in grade school. It creates barriers when you're in high school. It makes it difficult if you go to higher ed or try to build a career, because you're carrying all this stuff with you that also needs resources to be resolved. So morally and ethically, we damn sure should be doing everything that we possibly can in order to make sure that kids can be healthy and safe in any environment that they're in. And we should make damn sure that kids can recognize bad behavior to try to spare them from trauma that could cripple them over the course of their lifetime.
To show you what Representative Kelly is saying is how insidious this kind of behavior can be, is under the testimony, we had a first grader testify. He slipped my hand up the front of my shirt, up the back of my shirt, and under my skirt, and he told me that we were going to get married. So this is a first grader who has been convinced that he loved her and they were going to get married. That kind of stuff can leave a scar and damage someone. So this is not an easy issue. We realize that. We realize there's a little bit of pushback. But once we educate people, I believe that this is a bill that should easily pass. So I would love to see us get back to order. I have no idea if Chairman Jones is planning on having a Zoom health or Zoom education meetings, but we have to get back to business, and we'll make all of this new information that came out from the trial. Remember, when we did the testimony at the House, we were not able to testify on what happened in court. That's all done. We have all the proceedings. I have it all printed out sitting here, so we will make that part of our next set of hearings.
Well, Rosa, it looks like you are muted. We just want to make sure we can hear you.
Oops.
Rosa, if you want to try again, wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much once again, Representative Lives and Representative Kelly, for your passion, your advocacy, and your support of this such important bill to finally have the voices of those that have been silenced for so long. When we talk about sexual violence, it's about power and control, those dynamics. When we are teaching our children about so many other issues that at times are not relevant, it is important that we understand that in order to prevent sexual violence and to stop, that the education needs to start at an early stage, and that is K to 12. We have done quite a lot after they are in college, and sometimes that is very late. And understanding that now they have the opportunity and we have the responsibility to ensure that the education that they receive in their places of actual education is in a safe environment, right? And we also have the responsibility to hold those in power, teachers, administrators, PA advisors, counselors, accountable for the safety and the security of those children, as well as their parents. So thank you very much for your efforts in Erin's Law, and we hope to continue to support and to continue to elevate our voices as we move forward this bill in Ohio. We are going now to go ahead and transition to our keynote speaker, which is Lynn Rosenthal. Before COVID-19, our plan for this day was to speak about the shifts in federal policy away from VAWA reauthorization and the impact that federal law and federal appointees make on issues traditionally dealt with by states. To that end, we invited Lynn Rosenthal, the first ever White House advisor on violence against women, to talk about the past and the future of violence against women policy. Even with the current crisis, this topic is more important than ever, and Lynn is uniquely suited to discuss it. In her past capacities, she has developed initiatives to address sexual violence, reduce domestic violence homicides, and improve workplace responses and K-12 responses to violence against women and girls. Today, Lynn serves as the president of the Center for Family Safety and Healing for Nationwide Children's Hospital, where she sees firsthand the impact of COVID-19 has on our provisions of services and what we can learn and apply in the future. I know that the transition to Ohio has not been the happiest, Lynn, but we are privileged to have you in Ohio and now actually in Columbus. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us today. And we are here to listen to all you have to express. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Rosa. It's an absolute pleasure. And I'm sorry it's taken me a year to get to connect with you all and get to know you more. You've already had an amazing program. You've had 5 keynote speakers. They've been fantastic. I am so impressed with the distinguished leadership in the Ohio Legislature on these issues. And I know it's not an easy battle, but it's one that will ultimately be successful. I have faith in that. It's an honor to be speaking in a room full of experts this morning and heroes. Those of you working on the front lines in rape crisis centers are very much my heroes. I also want to note that we have to take time to breathe in this moment in time. I just got off my call before this one was with an all-staff meeting at the Center for Family Safety and Healing, where we talked about the challenges of our medical providers and forensic interviewers who are still coming into the clinic and meeting with patients and families and how they can do that safely and what the needs of patients and families are at this moment in time in our Child Assessment Center. And we were also talking about what it means for our domestic violence advocates to be working through telehealth and what they're learning in that process, and what it means for our home visitors who are working to reduce infant mortality and improve connections with moms and babies, and what that's been like at this moment in time. And we also are having the very difficult conversation about whether our organizations will survive in the same way after this crisis. So I feel like all of me, it's sort of drinking from a fire hose. And as much as I appreciate that we're also trying to do business as usual, I do hope that we're taking time to breathe in this moment and to recognize it. I have a very brilliant niece. Some of you may know her work, Lindsay Rosenthal, who works at the Vera Institute and did a lot of the work on the girls' initiatives around the country and reducing girls' incarceration. And we had one of our family Zoom calls, as everybody is doing. And I was talking about this work from home issue, and she said, I want you to stop. This is when your baby niece becomes far more brilliant than you'll ever be. She said, I want you to stop talking about working from home as though it's a normal moment. She said, we're working from home in a crisis. And that's a very different way to think about it, that it's not the sort of the kinds of things we might find satisfying about that in normal times. Rather, it's trying to balance everything. I know our team at the Center for Family Safety and Healing is working on childcare and how do they work from home when they have childcare responsibilities. Spouses, partners have lost their jobs. families are afraid that when we do go back to work, their loved ones won't be safe. So I just want to acknowledge all of that. And at the same time, in the center, we at the Center for Family Safety and Healing, like all of you, we put survivors in the center of that. That is what we do. And then we work from there. I also know we're very fortunate to have a home at Nationwide Children's Hospital because my colleagues, many of you, those I talk to around the country as a standalone nonprofit, it's a very difficult time to be trying to navigate all of this. So if we in any way can be helpful, please let us know. So I hope you're breathing in. You're the experts at resilience. I hope you're breathing it in for yourself as well. We all need to do that. I have been so impressed in the year I've been in Ohio with this stunning leadership here. You heard of it today in the legislature, and it's really all of you. Everywhere I go, I meet people doing just really amazing work in this state. And so it's my honor really to be here with you. I did want to begin by kind of going back to the past and talking about the shoulders that we stand on. You know, we're at a time in this movement where we're working intensely on federal policy and state policy, but we all we stand on the shoulders really of the grassroots. And I want to go back sort of farther than what we think of as sort of women's liberation history, back to the 1940s and 50s, where Black women's leadership was so essential in the anti-sexual violence movement, where Black women in the civil rights movement were working very intently on the kind of sexual violence Black women were experiencing at the hands of gangs, organized gangs of white men. You all know Reese Taylor's story, I'm sure, who in 1944 in Alabama was kidnapped by 6 white men, kidnapped and raped by 6 white men who were never brought to account for that. What you may not know, or you might know, is that Rosa Parks went to Alabama to support Reese and increase visibility about what had happened to her, and that Black women leaders at that time continued to work for the next decade to raise that visibility. So those are some of those are the trailblazers in whose footsteps we all walk. You certainly know that in the early 70s in the women's liberation movement and consciousness raising groups that rape was one of the very first issues women identified when they came together and began to talk about their lives, that the first hotlines were people's home phone numbers, the first battered women's shelters were living rooms. That's the history, that's the place where all of us come from. And for me, it's always very important to remember that in everything that we do. And certainly Black feminist leadership was critical in the rape crisis movement. I think about the DC Rape Crisis Center and Indira Hennard and all the amazing work she's doing today, and Loretta Ross and all the folks that came before her, sort of the foremothers of the movement. Loretta Ross recently accepted my friend invitation on Facebook, which I was so excited about. So, you know, these are the real foremothers. So even though we're in this other place today, this is where we come from. Survivor stories, as you know, and has been mentioned today, have always been central to this movement. They have been over the years, and certainly in the last 3.5 years, there's been an unprecedented act of national storytelling. But that didn't come from nowhere. That's because of what you do every day in your community. So I want to make that note. I was 15 when I was sexually assaulted by a family friend, and a series of very violent sexual assaults by somebody who had a key to our house and could come in at any time. And, you know, I've written about this in this book. I have a chapter in this book called West Wingers, which is about the work of the Obama White House on a lot of critical social policy issues. But it's really about people like me who were working on things they cared a lot about personally. So it's a great book. If you want a copy of it, let me know. I can send you one. So I've written in this story, but what I most wanted to say about it today is that, and I wrote about what it felt like to sit in the East Room of the White House and listen to President Obama make the first speech of a sitting president about sexual violence, and remembering what it felt like as a 15-year-old who was very isolated and alone. I wish I'd had all of you. To my topic of federal policy, it may often feel very removed from what you do every day, and I've been struggling with that with myself because now I'm back at the local level, and sometimes when I sit on those federal policy calls, I'm like, but wait, I'm just trying to figure out, how to get hand sanitizer for the families that we serve, and how to create care packages, and how to get food cards out to our families in the home visiting program. So sometimes it seems kind of removed from all that, but it's actually not really. And I also am reminded every day on those calls, and when I look at federal legislation, that what's written in the federal law makes a very big difference in what we're able to do on the local level. I think of that particularly when we in the VOCA, when we look at VOCA today and how it serves survivors very directly, but also the kind of funding climate that we're in. So what happens at the federal level makes a big difference. You might be the kind of person who adores policy and you think like that and you want to hear the nitty-gritty details, or you might be someone whose eyes glaze over and say, just tell me when I need to make 10 phone calls and I'll do it. All of that is okay. When I think about the Violence Against Women Act, I think about how important it was that VAWA created a response to domestic violence and sexual assault. And in the early transcripts, in the early days of the hearing, sexual assault issues were very much front and center. And there were a lot of experts who testified about sexual assault, and advocates, and also survivors. So even though in kind of those middle years, sexual assault received less focus in VAWA implementation, if you look at the origins of the bill, sexual violence was really front and center in that congressional record. And so that created the stop grant structure with the basic sort of law enforcement, prosecution, courts, and advocacy structure, but that over the years that structure was really expanded upon, really moved far beyond the criminal justice system to create transitional housing, healthcare programs, and prevention. So it's not really accurate to say that VAWA only focuses on the criminal legal response. It creates a much broader response to violence against women, although it certainly started there. And over the years, VAWA has been improved upon, and in 2005, the Sexual Assault Services Program was created, which was really, outside of the RPE program, the very first federal funding stream for those direct services, specifically for that, even though, of course, VOCA has always been super important in that picture. You might remember, when you think about VAWA's improvements over the years, you might remember the 2013. Some of you were very involved in this moment in time in 2013, where there was a real effort on the part of the majority party to undercut the Violence Against Women Act in the House. And the House representatives at that time actually passed a version of VAWA that stripped out not only critical improvements that we were trying to make, but also that took direct aim at the VAWA immigration policies. From the beginning, VAWA has had protections. First, for battered immigrant women, undocumented women, to separate their status from their abuser. And second, for the U and T visas that were created in 2000. And those have always been very strong protections for undocumented survivors of sexual assault. In 2013, that really ugly fight was a harbinger of things to come around immigration. And the majority party took direct aim at those immigration provisions, and in fact stripped all those protections out, would have left battered immigrants and immigrant victims of crime, including sexual violence, in grave danger. And so it was a shocking moment. I was in the White House at that time. I remember sitting at my desk. The bill passes the House, but of course we had to oppose it. The Obama administration had to oppose the legislation, as did all the advocacy groups, because it undercut the very premise of VAWA, which was victim safety and offender accountability. And I remember having to write a statement for President Obama that the White House then releases, saying exactly why we had to do that. It was really tough to do, but of course we had to do it. And then something very bizarre happened. If any of you were following this at the time, I just will never forget that moment, where after that occurred and that bill passed the House, but was never going to make it over to the Senate, then the House created a very unusual rule which allowed them to take up that House bill and then take up the Senate bill. It was created in an unusual way so that the Senate bill, which was much stronger, would end up passing. And it was a surprising moment because it wasn't the outcome we all expected. And even that night that strange rule occurred and the votes were happening, I was sitting on the phone with, some of you might remember Pat Roos, who's been around for a long time doing federal policy. We were counting the votes in the House, and I said, this is never going to happen. And indeed, it did happen. And the very strong Senate bill passed the House. So I think that's a tribute to a number of things. The bill included those very strong protections for LGBTQ communities. It was the first time in federal statute there were anti-discrimination provisions for gender identity. It also included the tribal jurisdiction provisions to allow tribes to prosecute non-native offenders for certain kinds of domestic violence crimes, and these strong immigration provisions. Those three things created such a strong coalition, and that coalition held together. They did not allow the divide and conquer strategy of, well, we'll give up on the native provisions if we can get the LGBTQ provisions, or we'll give up on the immigration provisions if we can get the native provisions. The National Task Force did not allow that to happen. And that's a tribute to their work. It's a tribute to a group of Native women who came and lived in DC for weeks to make that happen. And so I just want to note that when you're working on complex state legislation, like we heard about today, to remember these very successful coalition efforts is to hang together, stick together, and have a coalition that's based on that kind of level of integrity is what's super important. So after that big fight, the bill indeed passed, but that was really a harbinger of what would happen in recent years on immigration. What we see today on this really ugly immigration policy, really that was sort of a shot over the bow, if you will, that was coming. We also saw in 2013 something that we heard less about, and that was the sexual assault setting aside, gosh, now I can't remember, 20-25% of the stop grant funding that had to be designated for sexual assault. We worked very closely with the Alliance on that, and it was a very important, and it was a time when, in large part, the domestic violence community really stepped forward in support of that. It was a really great coalition builder at that time. And one of the other pieces we heard less about in 2013 that sort of tees us up for today is the improvements on the VAWA housing provisions that protect survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and stalking from eviction because of having experienced those crimes. And those are key anti-discrimination provisions. They're very important. And they've been hard to implement. So I don't really know how well that's going here, but your legal service providers and others should be working on that. And in 2013, those provisions were expanded to 8 additional subsidized housing programs. So if you live in a moderately low income housing development funded by low income housing tax credits, those provisions apply. That is super important to protecting sexual assault survivors' housing. I want to credit the National Alliance working with all of you with the strong work they did on helping people understand at the federal level how sexual violence affected housing. So that sort of gets us to where we are today. I wanted to note where that VAWA was super important on the sexual assault side on the state certifications, and I'm sure you've all worked on them, but that in order to get VAWA funding, the states have to certify that rape kits should be provided at no cost to the survivors, and also must be provided without report to law enforcement. So we know that created a lot of stuff for us around where kits were and how they were being stored and all of that. But the idea that you should be able to get a rape kit exam, many of you, like I have heard from survivors how validating that was to go and say, I think this happened to me. I'm not sure exactly what happened. And to get a rape kit exam and see the evidence that indeed something happened. And I certainly have heard that from many survivors. So those are critical parts of VAWA that we don't always think of. They're kind of the backdrop of federal policy. So you know VAWA expired in 2018. What does that mean? So the funds can continue to be appropriated. I think it's important, and you all know that because you work on it every year in the federal budget. So the funds can continue to be appropriated. It's 2 separate processes. You write the authorizing statute and then you fund it. Different committees, different processes that occur. Authorizing happens every 5 years in theory, and appropriations happens every year. And the certifications I mentioned, the critical policy pieces also do not expire. But the longer a piece of legislation like VAWA goes without authorization, the more likely it is that its integrity will be undermined. So the more likely it is that eventually appropriators could say, well, we've been putting the money here, but we think it should go here, because they're not really as bound to the statutory purpose areas when the bill has expired. So it's critical that we get it done. It doesn't mean things fall apart tomorrow, but it means in the long term, things can fall apart. I don't know if you remember when McKinney-Vento, those of you who work on housing, McKinney-Vento went for years and years and years without being reauthorized. And in that intervening time, the appropriators did a lot of mucking around with that money. So I would fear for VAWA to be on that same track. And that's why we think it's so important. That reauthorization is critical. And that not just reauthorization, but improvements. That's the story of VAWA. It's always been improved over time. That has to continue. So, for example, in the proposed bill, which has passed the House of Representatives, VAWA 2019, we would see a closure of the boyfriend loophole you've heard about in gun policy, where today the federal gun prohibitors on misdemeanor domestic violence convictions only apply if you were married, lived together as if a spouse, or had a child in common. So for people who are in those circumstances, who are in relationships but never lived together or have a child in common or were never married to each other, the gun prohibitors today don't apply. So this would close that loophole. This is something Senator Klobuchar has really been working on. There are clarifications to ensure that the LGBTQ provisions can be implemented. There has been a lot of resistance to these provisions, some at the state level, some even within the Department of Justice. So there are clarifications that these provisions can be implemented and how to do that. And there are improvements to the housing provisions I described so that they work better for people. And there's a big increase. I think it's a $100 million increase in rape prevention and education funding to help really address the current moment of the need for sexual assault prevention. And then finally, there's an expansion of those tribal provisions that I talked about from to cover sexual violence, which we knew sort of when we were able in 2013 to get the domestic violence piece covered. We could explain the nexus to the tribe, but we had to go a step further. We knew all along that indeed these provisions had to cover sexual violence, because you know what happens. Somebody's sexually assaulted on a reservation or an Indian country, and it can be 2 or 3 days before anybody ever gets there from law enforcement, much less from the federal prosecutor's office. So this gives tribes the authority to prosecute sexual violence against non-native offenders when the tribe has kind of a structured criminal justice process. So it's really important that this happen. It's very important that we honor tribal sovereignty. It's not really creating new law in a way. It's recognizing the sovereignty that tribes have always had. Just to sort of note the COVID moment, so that's the picture. And what I want to urge you to do is to follow the lead of the Ohio Alliance. They'll sort of tell you, when do I get activated? When do I need to make my phone calls? When do I need to actually make some in-person visits? Because that moment will come again. But let's not lose sight in the COVID moment of the need to reauthorize VAWA. And in fact, in many ways, it's even more important. But in the COVID moment, you know, as I said, I'm dealing with everything you're dealing with on a day-to-day level. What we're seeing, domestic violence came up earlier. Our calls for new requests for service in our domestic violence program are way down. The Choices Hotline in Franklin County hasn't seen a big spike in numbers of calls, but what they are seeing is a big increase in serious lethality of calls. What we're seeing is that we are able to pretty steadily provide services through telehealth, believe it or not, in our domestic violence program as well as in our home visiting program. I know a lot of us have a view sometimes, well, survivors can't do this, or it's not safe to do that, or we can't impose that. But the fact is, survivors themselves are finding very creative ways to get the help they need. And so they are able to take part in, you know, I'm going to go out and walk the dog. I'm going to go sit in my car. I have to run to CVS. I'm going to go in the bathroom in the middle of the night. Now, the more text capacity we have available, the better for all of our services. I don't know what you all have or don't have. We don't really have it at the center, so it's one of our top priorities for the rest of this year because it would make a very big difference, and we're all kind of behind the curve if we don't have text and chat available. It's critically important. It's the main way that young people who carry the greatest burden of sexual violence reach out for help. So I wanted to note that as well. So that's what we're seeing on the local level. In the COVID-4 package, again, follow the lead of the Ohio Alliance. In the COVID-4 package, there's some new funding that would be provided for VAWA-related programs. It will not be fast, but it will get out through those channels. The Office on Violence Against Women is very aware of the need to make it flexible and to get it out, but there'll be $100 million for your sexual assault services program, set aside funding for culturally specific programs, a lot of money for housing, as you know here, and directing additional funds into VOCA so that maybe we won't not only not suffer the cuts, but have increased resources. So just do what the Alliance says. I'm not really that autocratic, but I just think they know what they're doing on the federal policy front. So Camille and company, I trust completely. So if they want you to activate, activate. I wanted to just close by saying, I think I might be a bit over my time, that I know there's some campus advocates on the phone. You've got my whole heart. You know, I worked really hard on the Title IX guidance in the Obama administration. And I know we're waiting. I didn't see if it happened today or not, but we're waiting with bated breath. We know that the DeVos-Trump administration will significantly narrow the Title IX response. You've all seen the sort of, and you submitted comments, there are 100,000 comments. Thank you to the student groups for really organizing that. It would significantly narrow the kind of cases that schools would have to investigate. It would significantly reduce protections for victim survivors. It would allow us to use the higher standard of evidence. All the things we knew were working to really help. It wasn't perfect. You know, nothing we did in the Obama administration was perfect. But without a doubt, Title IX opened up the conversation and pushed schools farther along. I did work at that time very closely with Katie Hanna and the Ohio folks, but I, quite frankly, until I got here and looked at your manual that you all created and others, I had no idea how great the work had been here. That's really very forward-leaning that you took Title IX and you made it real and you put it in practice. And that's been a bit overshadowed by kind of the controversies here, but it's very impressive work. So as soon as I saw it, I put on my Facebook page, "Dear Katie and others in Ohio, your great work is totally amazing." So thank you for making what happened at the federal level real at the state and local level and on the college campus level. So I'll end by saying it's up to us to ensure that we don't go backwards, that when you read the rule, read it carefully for where schools have discretion and keep pushing them in the right direction. It's, you know, it's old school advocacy out there, telling stories, asking them to do the right thing, pushing them to do the right thing, and building alliances. So I'll just end by, in this current moment saying that we, this morning on our all-staff call at the Center for Family Safety and Healing, we did 2 text exercises and created word clouds. And the first question was, what have you found most difficult at this moment in time? And the top sort of words in the middle of the word cloud were isolation and uncertainty. But then we asked, what have you most appreciated from your colleagues at this moment in time? And the top words were flexibility, creativity, and emotional support. So I'll just leave you with that because I know it's what you're doing every day. So thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Lynn, thank you so much for being, we appreciate you very much, Lynn, and thank you so much for your continuous advocacy, not only in the state of Ohio, but actually at a national level. I know that some of our guests and attendees are actually heading out to go ahead and meet with their legislators and their meetings one-on-one. Before we actually close out, I wanted to thank not only the speakers, but I wanted to thank personally each and every one of the members of OAESV staff. We have grown from 4 to over 17, and we are in different locations and being able to do this. So we do believe in the collective power that we have. So thank you, OAESV staff, for all that you do behind the scenes, for showing up every day, for pulling out information, for updating COVID website, to the communications team, to Camille for the meetings, and for everything that you do every day. It is important to understand that the time is now for us to embrace our voices. It is also time for us to advocate as we always do, but it also is time for us to advocate for what is right, for what is fair, for what is just, for what we were created to do. I ask you to breathe, and I ask you to pause. Pause for a second, a moment, and be grateful, even if life isn't perfect, but thankful for the life you get to live, for the stories, for the adventure, for those that you are blessed to be surrounded by, for also knowing that we hear you, that we value your work, even in the midst of difficult times. And I know at times we might think that we are all in the same boat, but we are not in the same boat. We might not be even in the same storm. For some people, it is sprinkling. That is a break. It's a breather. It's a pause in the normal. It's time to reconnect with family and slow down. Honestly, for some, it's kind of peaceful. For some, it's a storm. It's a bit scary. It's disruptive. It's enough to make you stay up and watch the news and worry. For some, it's a hurricane. It's tearing up at the boards and pulling off the roof, is washing them out to sea. It's dark and unknown. It's life changing. It is not wrong to be enjoying the sprinkles or to be enduring the storm. It is not wrong to be angry, to be mad, to be upset, to not know what to do. But please don't negate the difference. Please don't feel that you are alone, whether it is in the storm, whether it is in the boat. OESV is here for you, and we stand with you. We believe you, we support you, and we will always advocate for you. The time is now. Go get them, and thank you for all that you do every day in the midst of your storm.
Thank you for those powerful closing words, Rosa. This has been an immense program, and I'm so thankful for all of you for your time, effort, and energy in putting this together. I just wanted to touch base about a couple of logistics. If you are having trouble reaching your lawmaker at the number provided, please do not hesitate to reach out and let us know. If you have not received an email from your contact at OAESV, again, please feel free to follow up. Each person that filled out the SurveyMonkey format for a legislative meeting when we shifted to virtual should have been assigned an OAESV contact person. So if you are having any trouble at all, please reach out to that person, and you will receive a survey about your legislative meetings from the OAESV contact. And there will also be a survey that comes out just evaluating this program after you all have had some time to process what you learned today. So if you have anything that you need, please reach out to us. We are happy to provide any technical or logistical support that you need. And if there's anything else, feel free to jump in. Okay, enjoy your meetings. And if you're not having meetings, enjoy your afternoon.
This is Jen. I want to thank both of our interpreters, Danielle and Dee Dee, so much. And thank you for everyone joining us. Take care.